Thank y'all for tuning in to One Hell of a Fall, Law and Pandemic. I am DJ Moore, and we're here to do episode 4 with my man Everest. Thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
So just a little backlog with Everest. He was the first person I initiated contact with in law school from our legislation course.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, so how you gonna forget? So, and I can't remember who reached out to who, but I know it was more so like we seen how each other was going at it in law school, not towards one another, but trying to get the material off in our class, and we kind of had a respect for one another, and we linked up ever since then. We had those study groups going from there, which helped a lot. And so, without further ado, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell them why you came to law school, and we'll just go right into the topics.
Sure. Yeah, so my name's Everest. I grew up in Arizona. I did mock trial back in high school because I thought it'd be an easy A class, and it was. But I also found I was pretty good at public speaking and the
Kicking butt.
Yeah, kicking butt. The good critical thinking stuff that law takes. So in college, I kind of got more into it. I wasn't planning on going to law school until like my senior year.
Okay.
But I did an internship in court one summer and loved it. And I was like, yeah, this is the place for me. I want to get involved in law. So law school was my goal. I applied my senior year, didn't get in any of the schools I wanted to, so I did a year off. And in my year off, I applied again, and OCU was one of the schools I got into, and made the call to come here.
Gotcha. So was it easy for you to choose this school?
It was pretty easy. I was mostly set on Oklahoma City for family reasons, and it came down to this school or OU. And a lot of that was, in terms of deciding the school, a lot of that was kind of the clinics and what's available here. Okay. OCU has a strong criminal law program, a lot of national security classes, and a national security certificate, and that just seemed to be more geared towards where I wanted to go with my career, a little more than OU was.
That makes sense. I know one of the biggest things that I chose Oklahoma City as well because it was right down the street. It was only 3 hours away from Dallas, so I was like, cool, because most of the other ones I got accepted into, they were like 4.5 plus hours. And also because it's very remote, it's very key. So I didn't have to worry about traffic if I was trying to come to school because I knew I wasn't going to stay like in the downtown area. Yeah. But being able to commute and not be in traffic for 30 minutes was like key for me. So it was a lot of other variables that went into that, but I already explained that on the first episode. So did you say anything?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hoping to get out of law school, well, I kind of came in thinking that criminal law sounds like it'd be fun, but having taken a semester of the classes, they all sound like they're interesting in their own way. Mm-hmm. So who knows where it'll take me.
Got you. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into some of these topics for this episode, which I want to do a quick recap from episode 3 as far as we was mentioning the adjustments being made. And if you would like to start it off, tell me about some of the adjustments, or tell them about some adjustments you made from the first week of law school or the first initiation of law school up until the middle semester, and how did that work out for you as you was going through the rest of the semester?
Yeah, the big thing I changed up was at the beginning of the semester, I would basically study until the studying was done, and then I would kind of just, burn out.
Gotcha.
And they always tell you law school's it's a marathon, not a sprint.
For sure.
Realized that was true, and then about the middle of the semester, I tried kind of squeezing all of my academic life into like a 9-to-5 job.
Okay.
So I'd show up to the law school when it opened, and I'd stay there until 3 p.m. And if I didn't get all of my readings done, then that was it. That's all I was going to accomplish that day. And if I did get it done and had extra time, then I had time to go back over. Needless to say, I didn't have extra time very often.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand the sprint, not marathon. I mean, marathon, not sprint aspect of things, but I know that there were times where I sprint, walk, until I got to the finish line.
Yeah,
so
finals was a sprint.
Man, so yeah, you're like, I'm trying to get this over with. So I know for me, like, the adjustments that I knew was key was learning how to approach each class. Because we had different professors, it would require different preparation methods. And one way you may prepare for one professor may be a totally different way you have to prepare for another based on what they're trying to highlight. So I would say it's definitely like key to understand your professors on how you need to approach the material, and then also understanding what works best for you. And for me, like, I like to handwrite my notes, but it gets tricky when you're writing so fast and you're trying to read it again. It's like, okay, what did I just write? And then you gotta make phone calls and text again.
Yeah,
Man.
that's a mess.
So that was pretty much a huge thing for me, was learning how I need to approach each class, making sure that I read, and like how you said, you try to treat it as a 9 to 5. I knew I tried to get the next week's material out the way, since our last classes was on Thursdays. I tried to get it out the way on that Friday and Saturday. And then on Sundays, I would recap what I probably would need to. And then also, like, what would need to be more emphasized on. Like, what would I need to understand more if I didn't understand something the previous week.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much how I kind of did that. So if you didn't understand anything, or you knew you could have a better understanding of something, how did you try to go about figuring that material out?
If there was something I didn't know, usually my first step would be to go to outside help. Don't tell any of the professors, but I had Quimby, so a big part of my strategy became I would read through the Quimby case brief that's already done for me. That way, I kind of know what the issue is. I know what I'm looking for. So when I go through the big honking opinion, I can pull out what's important and differentiate it from that aspect.
Okay.
On top of that, a lot of it was the role that group work played. Because there are a lot of things that you can't pick up on your own.
For sure.
A lot of undergrad was, if you just bury your face in the book and then study the flashcards, you'll do all right on the exam. Law school is a whole lot different in the sense that, you read it up and you get to know it as much as you can, and that's half the battle. And the other half, the critical thinking and the real understanding portion, is when you're actually having a conversation about it.
Yep.
There wasn't really a topic I fully understood until I had talked it out with somebody.
Gotcha. That was key. I know, like, talking to you in general, or how we would talk about the material to passerbys, or let's just say, like, a biggie would be like, you'll see a friend of yours, but you want to say, like, hey, how's it going? But you're like, do you understand this? And then they'll be like,
exactly.
Okay, so I don't even care about your well-being. Yep. Do you understand this material? But it's out of just all love, though. So from that, like, I knew I don't know, did you ever touch any, like, case note supplements? Because, like, a lot of the case books has the case book supplements. Did you touch any of those?
Yeah, I didn't really use supplements. Typically, my only two resources were the case books we had, and then whatever I could find on YouTube or Quimby.
Okay.
And beyond that, I figured past that, if I'm not going to get it, I'm not going to get it, and there's no use taking it.
It's going to have to come.
Yeah.
No, I had to touch only because I knew, let's just say, like, we had Civil Pro together, so like, some of the rule and analysis wouldn't actually be just as clear cut when I'm reading the cases, especially when you just try to read through the author notes as well sometimes. So that case book supplements gave, like, the rule of what to take out of it, and then the analysis it have a solid analysis on what to take away from this case and what it took away from another case, or how does it lead up to this case. So that was pretty much like, oh, now this tying together, because like, we know, like, with the infamous Penoyer, we don't know what that was. You don't know what it is up until you start to understand why it's there. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Penoyer is specifically made no sense until you saw the context of the case that came after.
It was like, it was troublesome.
Yeah.
So, all right. So what about your instructors, right? We have similar instructors, but we don't have the same torts instructor, and we only take one of those instructors at the same time. So tell me, like, your thoughts on how you thought the professors might be up until you start to see how they actually were as people.
Yeah, so we had the same contracts professor, and at the beginning of the year, he was this very happy-go-lucky guy, and by the end of the year, he was still happy-go-lucky, but I really paid more attention to the expertise he had on the subject, because he knew contracts inside and out. He'd been in the field for 20 years, and I saw less of the kind of the goofy professor that I expected, and less of the jokes, and I saw more of, like, the knowledge of the minutiae of contracts.
Yeah. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, my torts professor was I don't want to say bland. he was very knowledgeable, but he stuck to the PowerPoints a lot. And I very quickly realized that was going to be a habit of his. So my end of year perspective was not very different from my beginning of the year perspective, which in a sense is good. There was nothing in that class that took me by surprise. Nothing that I didn't realize was expected of me and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then civil procedure, the class we had together, that was one of those professors where they come out the door swinging.
Oh man!
And they'll just roast people for the first 2 weeks just to set a baseline of
I can make you feel bad, but I'm here to help you grow.
The nonsense isn't gonna fly.
True.
And once she had established that environment, she became much more nurturing after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And she just got nicer as the semester progressed because that was, her strategy. And it worked really well because, in the beginning you realize, I need to take this class seriously.
That was the first class.
Civil procedure was usually the thing I'd study first because I had to get out of the way. Otherwise I was going to embarrass myself.
Oh, man. Especially with the cold call.
Oh yeah, but by the end of the semester, you realize that it's a professor who really cares about you as a person.
Exactly.
That's not something I would have expected from the first week of class.
Oh man, yeah, the first day was like whoa. So, man, yeah. So that's the cold call around the world.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, with vice versa to your torch professor, I wish my torch professor actually used PowerPoints because he talks so fast, and it's not bad because you can understand him. Clearly what he's saying, clear and concise. It's just when he starts writing on the board, you're like, okay, what am I writing? And it's all over here, and then he doesn't have the PowerPoints to supplement that. So you're like, I'm done taking notes for right now.
It's tough getting on the same page as the professors because they teach a very specific way, and you have to follow that way in your notes. Otherwise, none of it's going to make sense. And if that doesn't jive with the way you study, then it makes the whole class a lot tougher.
Yeah, you're gonna have to adjust real quick. So what about your thoughts of having to quarantine and how you kind of approach the game as well, as far as how it affects you from the middle semester to the end semester? Because at the beginning we already know it would have been more challenging because, like you said, we have to adapt to our professors. But how was it at the back end of things?
Even at the back end, adaptability was key. Overall, quarantine was kind of a double-edged sword because there were times when we were in person and then everyone's nervous about getting COVID and everyone's in masks and frustrated, and it comes to be the afternoon and some people are like, they'll pull down their mask to take a drink of water and then, forget about it for 10 minutes just because they need to breathe. The professors especially get very frustrated by the masks. I've noticed that a lot. I think the professors overall have been in a worse mood this year. Not because of anything the students are doing, but just because they've got it stuck on their face and it bothers them.
They're behind this plexiglass.
But then when we get on Zoom, we don't really see that. And we see... they can talk freely. We see the bottom half of their face, which is always unusual. So they can articulate their thoughts much more clearly, and they can, the whole thing kind of flows better because nothing's interrupting it. That said, the adaptability part comes in because a lot of law professors are, they got into law because they don't want to work technology.
For sure.
So having to navigate Zoom and troubleshoot Zoom especially, that's where a lot of us get tripped up. I know we even had one of our classes was canceled because the professor just couldn't.
Yeah, I'm done with this. I'll send y'all a record lecture later.
Yep.
And keep up with class.
So
that's what's funny.
If you can turn on a dime with your learning style to go from in person to virtual, then it works, and it has benefits either way. But it was definitely a hiccup, and it hit a lot of people hard.
Okay. So, before we talk about the approaches to finals, let's talk about some of the hobbies that was needed to be established. And I'm going to let you go first on this one, and I'm going to piggyback off of you.
Yeah, so law school typically is very hard on the logical part of your brain. And it's very stressful. So I tried to pick hobbies that are like the opposite. So they're creative things that are relaxing.
Mindless entertainment.
Mindless entertainment was a big one. It seems like most of my classmates have a Netflix show that they follow, like Grey's Anatomy. I love The Witcher. That's been my go-to.
I love The Witcher.
And The Mandalorian came out too, but I'll talk for hours about that. I would play video games sometimes. I'd get into Skyrim, and I would just walk around and pick flowers. Because that's, it's the mindless, droning-on activity that I felt like I needed.
So just... Adventureland.
Exactly, yeah. I could be out fighting dragons, I could be out casting spells, but nope, I'm just walking along the paths and picking flowers for like an hour and a half at a time. And it was almost like a runner's high. That's funny. Just being able to come off and let your brain settle down and cool off. And speaking of runner's high, exercise was another very important one.
Yeah, exercise must.
There's a lot of difference in the stress level between my classmates who did exercise and the ones who didn't.
No, I definitely think that's key, and I want to highlight that I was going to the gym 3 times a week, and because our classes was on Tuesday and Thursdays, it made it easier to go on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays for me.
For sure.
And so that was like a key thing, as a hobby or a habit, whatever. Like I knew that was going to be needed based on the rigid levels of law school, or the rigidity of law school. And so I would say like additional hobbies to me is kind of talking to family, figuring out where your support is at, because I came here from Dallas, Texas, and I didn't have like an established network of support my first year. So a lot of times you would need to hear like that one family member's voice, and taking the time out to see, to reflect on what you're actually doing it for, what makes your purpose would be big. Play dates with my dog. Make sure my dog goes to the dog park, because it was easy to like ignore her at times, and not ignore her like neglect, but ignore that it's a living being that needs too.
For sure.
And it's like, okay, when we gonna play again? Like, you gonna keep reading? And then I'm like, all right, let me get rid of this and walk my dog, take it to the dog park or whatever. And I would say, you know what? One that actually trips me up all the time, especially on Sundays, is football. College football, I'm okay. Yeah. I can go in and out of college football. That's not a struggle. NFL, 12 o'clock to Sunday night, it's hard for me to touch my books after that. But it be needed sometimes. So
yeah, and that's what it takes. Like I tried to pick hobbies that would make me forget I was in law school.
Yeah.
And the more it makes me forget, the better it is.
Oh man.
So man, if the movie theaters were open, I would have been there every single week.
Oh yeah. Movie theaters would be key. And even then, like even if it was open, I'll be like, okay, how many is gonna have less seating? Because some people, have their own thoughts about the pandemic, and it may not intertwine with yours, so you just gotta still take precautionary measures. So cool. So we got the hobbies aspect out the way, knowing that we have to make sure that we're able to decompress during these times to actually be a lawyer, or think like a lawyer nonetheless, and get a JD. So from that, when we talk about the middle of the semester and we talk about time winding down towards coming to finals, what were your approaches to finals? And we know that because we had a consolidated schedule, we didn't have nearly as much preparation time as other classes had, like all the other numerous classes had. So we had to prepare within this strict time frame. So how did you approach that?
Well, I forgot who told me this, but one of the big pieces of advice I got was that your the difficulty and stress of your finals week is entirely determined by how much work you do throughout the year.
That's true.
So I did a really, really good job of keeping up on my outlines. And at the end of each week, I would set aside, and that would be the first thing I do when the week ends, is I'd fill up my outlines and get everything up to date.
I commend you on that.
Once you start working on that, typically we studied for finals in 2 phases.
Okay.
The first phase was everybody on our own. We're going through our outlines. We're making sure we have memorized all the material rules and all the important cases and all the names and just the book stuff. And then typically the 2 days before each final, we would get together and just sit in a group basically all day and just talk about all of the material we learned to that point.
Okay.
So we'd spend half an hour talking about Pennoyer v. Neff, and we'd spend the next half an hour talking about how the international shoe case changed the Pennoyer v. Neff ideology. Okay. And being able to talk about it and apply it kind of stretched the type of muscles that we were going to need for the essay questions on the finals.
For sure.
Because multiple choice is that's the very small portion of what you're actually looking at on a final in terms of how important it is, how much you have to study for it. Because you either know it or you don't. Yeah. But the essay stuff, that's not really stuff that you can do on your own. Yeah. Typically, you want to write out essays to practice and have a friend grade them, and you just want to talk it out and discuss it to get the nitty gritty detail
to accumulate those extra points that you might leave on the table.
Exactly, because there may be a certain analysis you do, like the Erie analysis. That's a big one we focused on. And you could know the Erie analysis forward and backwards by the book, but when it comes to actually applying it to facts, that's something that no amount of reading is going to help you do that.
For sure.
You have to either find hypotheticals that talk about the area analysis, or you have to find somebody who also knows about it and just create hypotheticals and talk those out. So that's typically what we did the few days before each final, and I think it helps drastically. That was, for the most part, our approach.
Okay. I remember coming to Section 4, and y'all helped me out with a lot of the subjects, because for me, I think it's big for self-study, and then also knowing which brains to pick during those times as well, because somebody may be knowledgeable or very competent in this one area, but they might not be in this next area. So I think that people have to understand who they can go to what for. But I know for me, that became, I ain't gonna say a struggle, but you don't want to impose yourself on somebody else's schedule.
Right.
So I would try to make sure ahead of time that I could reach out to the people who I knew was competent in this and competent in that, and then take time for people who reached out to me to kind of see what can work, and make sure it ain't overwhelming at the same time.
And I think COVID had a hand in that. From what I've heard about law school, I guess the typical way it happens is you kind of fall into a group of 4 or 5 people, and that's your study group through all your classes, and that's who you meet up with. But we have virtually no time to socialize outside of class. We can get on Zoom calls and stuff, but it's very hard to actually form a group of 4 or 5 people. So what we ended up doing was we just studied in class. So it's basically a class-sized study group. And it was less effective because a lot of people just stood on the sidelines and had to watch. But but it was tough putting together a smaller group, just because you don't really know people.
You know people, or if you do study at the school, you still got to worry about the one study room, or one person study rooms, and the 2 people study rooms. So you're
finding a place to study was also a big issue. There's not enough room in the to socially distance in the school to be able to really study effectively.
That makes sense. So now that we talked about the approach to final exams, let's talk about the final exams in itself.
Oh boy.
Which one was the toughest for you? Let's start with that first. Out of civil procedures, contracts, and torts, which one was the toughest for you?
So I felt most prepared for civil procedure, and I think that's tied with contracts for the hardest one.
Okay.
Civil procedure, just because we went in expecting a question about personal jurisdiction, because that's what you cover for most of civil procedure is personal jurisdiction. And we get this thing that's quasi-personal jurisdiction, and instead we're still in debates on what the question was actually asking. But I took the approach of, based on the question we got, what's the difference between arising out of versus relating to? What do those 2 terms mean? How are they similar? How are they different? Is there a way to reconcile them? All within the context of personal jurisdiction, which was much, much more complex than I expected to be doing. Because all the hypotheticals are just, hey, does the court have personal jurisdiction over this person or not? You explain yes or no and why. But here I was asking to basically act as a judge and put a meaning to 2 terms, and then decide which one is right, or if they can both exist, and that the level of complexity on that was just way more than I was anticipating.
So I definitely used I tried to use case interpretations to help with that, and like you said, it was more complex because you're expecting this. That's what you tailor your outline to. We never use outlines, so you tailor your outline to be okay, I can at least answer 2 or 3 of these type of essays. But then after that, you're like, oh, what did I just read from my essay? Oh my gosh. And then we still, on top of that, because I do want you to still elaborate more, but on top of that, with the civil procedure, we had a time lapse. So
oh boy.
So we had 3 hours on the board initially, and then 15 minutes prior to the actual time was supposed to be done, the professor comes in there and swipe off the time. It'd be oh yeah, I got 15 minutes instead of 45.
Yeah, we lost a half an hour.
What are you doing?
The material of studying finals is already hard enough that once you start adding in logistical and technical issues, it all goes down the drain. That was by far the worst part about that exam, was that you tailor your entire, for a law school exam, you have to dole out your time very very deliberately, because there's never enough time to get everything done. So you have to maximize the time you spend on the points you get.
Mm-hmm.
So a person will look at an essay and see, okay, if it's worth a third of the points on the exam, then I should spend a third of my time on it.
Okay.
So they set aside this question and they say, okay, I have an hour to answer this question.
Yeah.
And then half an hour before our time was up, with 30 minutes left on the clock, the professor or the proctor comes in and changes the time and announces you have 5 minutes left. And that's when people started breaking down crying.
Oh yeah.
Because it was.
Oh yeah. It was madness. It was madness after that one. I'll talk about. I heard yelling in the parking lot and everything. Like, why?
I have never seen a group so angry as I did that time.
Oh yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure the administration had got a nice amount of email floods.
And I love OCU. They've done a great job so far. But that one issue was
just a little trip up. Just one little trip. Yeah. But okay, so contracts. I think for me, we do have the same professor, but that was my easiest one because it was like you said. I took it as either you know it or you don't. But then when you're actually analyzing the question, the essay question, and how to approach it, it was easier to apply it based on the ones I got in torts and civil procedures. So it's like, okay, I ain't got to think as hard. I just got to know what I'm trying to apply here.
I think that illustrates the point pretty well that we are very different people.
Okay.
Because I thought contract was by far the most difficult substantively. Because you can look at an issue in contracts. A big one we learned was Section 2207.
Yeah.
When somebody thinks that their contract says X and the other person says Y.
Yep.
Whose term governs?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that hinges on is it a material term? Is it important to the contract? Mm-hmm. And that's such a subjective thing because what I think is important to a contract may be totally different to what you think is important to a contract.
For sure.
We had that the ice house case where we had to focus on this person bought an ice house or this person bought a real house like a full house and across the street there was an ice house.
Yep.
And they bought the house anticipating that the ice house was going to be removed because it was an eyesore.
For sure.
So is removing an eyesore when you buy real estate, is that a material term of real estate contract?
Yeah.
It could go either way. So that's been the tough part about me with contracts is, how do you tackle an issue with so much gray area and assign any definiteness to it?
Man, and then the reliance aspect of it, the consideration aspect of it. Like, I gotta be a psychologist and a lawyer. Like, what's going on? So, no, I'm with you on that. So we both can say torts was just fair.
Torts was fair because torts is a very straightforward approach. You get kind of a story, a narrative painted before you in the hypothetical.
Okay.
And then you just have to pick out, what torts were committed. Was somebody negligent? Did somebody commit a battery against somebody else? Did somebody get intentional infliction of emotional distress? And each one of those has solid elements. If you're looking at negligence, you need to find a duty breached causing damage.
Yep.
Those are the four big ones.
Mm-hmm.
And if those four elements are there, then you have negligence. Easy as that. Civil procedure and contracts are a lot more complicated because they're a lot less clear.
Yeah, and it can expand in many different ways based on what you actually trying to argue.
And there are lots of exceptions to both of those too.
The defenses and everything. Yeah, so I'm like, this is based on how well you can annotate and articulate what you trying to persuade the jury or the judge to do. Yeah. More so than thinking like A, B, C, D, or which answer choice is it? It's B. Like, no, that's not how law works. So, so what would you say from how you approach the finals now and how you took the final exams? Do you see yourself doing something differently next semester? Because I know I do. Yeah. And that's starting with outlines a little bit earlier.
I'm going to start on my outlines as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I started on my outlines this semester, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks in. And I think already that was waiting too late. Okay. Starting next year, I basically just want to take the table of contents from our textbooks and our casebooks, plop it in the outline, and then just start filling it out starting week 1.
Gotcha.
Because it's so easy to let the outline slip, and it's so easy to say, oh, this isn't important enough to put in my outline. Because I always tried to keep it small. Yep. And I think that worked to my disadvantage because I got to the end, and I had a good sense of what the general ideas of my class was, but I knew that the final was going to have, and it did have, like a lot of the nitty-gritty, the little details. The things that a professor just spends 5 minutes on in class and then never talks about again is liable to be a question on the final. So I got to make sure that stuff like that is showing up in my outline and not just the big ideas.
Oh yeah, that was torts for me.
Oh, for sure.
It was it it'd be like, oh yeah, this is one legal doctrine tool for this,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, this 30 points on the essay out of 150. And you like, it's 30 points,
Yeah,
but it's a
which is
significant
so good.
amount of points.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, it's definitely easy to kind of overlook the small things. And I know for me, what I plan on doing differently is getting started on my outlines early, and then also making sure I interact with the professors more, because I felt like I knew that I was interacting with the professors, but like from the table contents aspect of it, if I interact with them more to be like, hey, what should I list here as well, would be big, because a lot of people don't think they have to interact with their professors until it's too late, and I think you're never too early to interact with them.
Exactly.
So that's what I feel like is a big thing.
The way I see it is, if I see a professor in the hallway and they don't know my name, then there's an issue.
Yeah, you need to know me.
Yeah.
I ain't asking that many questions. If I ain't a lightweight annoying you,
Yep.
and we know some people who have some questions now, like they was known.
Yeah.
So, but out of good faith, and I think that's how it has to be, to stimulate that curiosity of what you may or may not know, and want to be precise about it.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much it. Unless you had any final words to say.
No, that about covers it. I think overall it just comes down to how well you plan it, how well you organize it, and how well you can adapt.
All right, so you heard it here up until the point talking about final exams, of having a fall semester during a pandemic in law school. So I want to thank y'all for listening to me. Thank you, Everest, for coming in to share your expertise and your knowledge about law school as well, and giving those who is curious about it another approach, different perspectives on how they can come in and learn as well. So thank you for coming and joining me, and that's it. Thank you for tuning in to One Hell of a Fall, Law and Pandemic. I am DJ. See you soon.